allow you to get into a church and everything. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is sometimes. Again, I know pastors get calls from dozens, hundreds, I don't know, missionaries, and again, they don't know them from a hole in the ground and everything else, but I'm glad that it just worked out, and he was able to get me a meeting for tonight. I didn't have anything, so I'm just trying to make mileage while I can. I'm, again, being from Canada, I can legally be down here 180 days, and I'm going to max those out. I had every intention of going back home in April, because I didn't want to be away from my family that long, but the Lord just had different plans, and so my government has instituted a pretty serious restrictions and everything else. They're really trying to deter travel, international travel, and so if I was to go back now, I would have to have a negative COVID test within 3 days of my flight. They've shut down all airports to international travel except 4 across Canada. You choose which one you go to, and when you get to that airport, they'll administer a PCR test, and while you await the test or the results of that test, they take you, escort you, I don't know, but you've got to go to a government-approved hotel where you have to wait for those results until they're satisfied, basically. And they said, be prepared of spending upwards of $2,000. Again, it's all on my dime. And so I'm down here, and I'm just going to make hay while the sun is shining. I started full-time Deputation last January, and so I'm really hoping. Right now I'm at about 51, in between 51 and 55%. I've got some churches here, a handful of churches have taken me on. I just don't know the amount yet, so God's really blessed in that way. So I'm thrilled. Again, I'm hoping and praying that I don't have to reset the clock from July till January, basically, and then have to come down here in 2022. I'd like to be in Italy by the end of this year. The missionary that we're going to tag up with, he wants to take a furlough. He's been there for 7 years, hasn't taken one yet. And so if I can get there and the family, however God wants to work it out, then we can kind of just watch over the church. And he would be blessed and encouraged by that, because you just don't want to leave your work to anybody. And again, there's not many faithful men there. That's the problem. There's more faithfulness in women. But again, because it's poor, the men are off working, and they'll work eight days a week, basically, wherever they can get it. And so anyway, that's the game plans. Whatever the Lord wants to do, we'll just trust Him for it. So again, I got down here. We had a lockdown last year, 3.5 months. I got stuck in Canada. How I was able to get down was flying. I didn't know nothing about it. I just had my Bible Institute graduation, and I told my wife that week, I said, babe, I'm going to be stuck here to the fall. Again, nobody knew nothing about flying, and they kept pushing that border closure, 30 days, and so I had prayed on the 11th, the day after my Bible Institute graduation. I said, Lord, I need a loophole to get down to the States. People are investing me and supporting me, and I just want to get to work. And so the 12th, I had started a job driving truck, but I was in the passenger seat, and I just went on the news. And I saw an article. There was a lady that was trying to cross the border into the U.S. to see her newborn granddaughter. Of course, she was turned away. But the U.S. Guard said, well, have you considered flying? And when I read that, I was like, what? There's my loophole. And so I phoned the airport, and I said, ma'am, I just read this. Is this true? Yeah, absolutely. I said, non-essential or essential, you can just fly into the States. Yep. And she said, well, there's only one catch, though. There's only one flight a day, and it's into Minneapolis. And that was the time that they were burning it down. And I kind of joked with her. I said, well, they haven't burned that down yet? No, we're still flying there. All right, very good. So I had my plane tickets booked. I came down 10 days later, and I was going to go the Monday right after that Friday, but I checked on quarantine and all that. Didn't need to quarantine, so I was able to give my wife and kids an extra week before I launched out. I stayed down there 5 months, and when I came down there last year, I didn't have nothing but suitcases. I had to leave my vehicle and everything, but the Lord was gracious and kind, and He had a pastor and his family. They gave me the van that I'm driving, gave me the title to it and everything. And so, and with him being a mechanic, I dropped it off last November when I flew back home out of Chattanooga. And yeah, before I came down, they just made sure that it was put back on the hoist. And if there was anything that needed fixing, they fixed it for me. So God's been a real blessing and encouragement to me. There's been many hands to get me where I am at today. This is not a one-man show. Again, just with churches having me in, with love offerings, people praying. Again, it's been a huge blessing. There are some CDs there that I'm selling for $10, and the behind that is a lady in our church, plays absolutely beautiful music. She can play pretty much any instrument. And last year when I was in lockdown, stuck at home, she had sent a bunch of music to my wife because my wife plays penny whistle and piano, and so they were going to, kind of have a duet thing and play together and all that. So she was going to practice playing penny whistle along that. And I said, babe, I said, she's got to get this on a CD. I mean, this is too beautiful to. And so I encouraged her. I said, listen, why don't you tell her to get this thing on a CD? I'll take it with me, see if I can sell it, and it could be a blessing to other people. And so she did it. But what she said is, you know what, because you helped a dream come true, she said, whatever you sell, I'm going to donate back to you to help with your moving expenses. And so, again, it's just been a lot of God's people just helping us to get where we are, and I'm very grateful. And I'm grateful for the Wilcox. I feel like I've gotten a spiritual mom and dad here on the trip, and it was a blessing. It was a great change of pace. Really enjoyed it. And my wife just, oh yeah, you're having a great time, and I am. I'm an animal guy. I'll give that in my testimony right after the video. But anyway, it's been a blessing, and it has been a nice change of pace. I wasn't sure. I was apprehensive when the pastor said, yeah, you're going to stay with my parents, and I gripped the steering wheel a little hard, and because I've heard some horror stories of pastors and preachers going to stay with people, and one instance I heard of the preacher showed up, people escorted him into a cellar-type basement, locked the door, and left for the evening, and that's where they left him. So I had that, and I had like Bates Motel or something in the back of my mind. So, but anyway, they were good and gracious and kind, and it's been a blessing to be here. So God is good. You know what? He knows what we need and when we need it, and it was just good. Like I say, having to be away from home for 6 months, it's a long haul, but every once in a while, you just throw some dear people in your way, and it's been a blessing. So this video, we'll show it here right away. My wife and I took our first survey trip in 2018, June, July. We stayed with 3 missionaries, one on the island, and 2 in the main, and 1 in Rome, and then 1 south. And I always knew it was Italy, I just didn't know where. And God didn't even confirm that when we went there. It wasn't until after where he burned my heart for Sicily, and I got a hold of the missionary and said, hey, I think I need to come back. And I did. God worked it out I went back in March of 2019, spent 10 days with the family, and again, this will all explain it, but that's where the Lord confirmed Sicily, and he gave us a city where we're going to go and start a work. So again, our intentions are really first when we get there to attend language school, university right off the hop. We're going to help a missionary there. That way we don't have the pressures of not being able to communicate to people and everything else. And so too many missionaries come and go to Italy, and the language gets put on the back burner, and then they get frustrated and everything else, and they burn out, and then they leave. Missionary is known as a graveyard Italy is known as a graveyard for missionaries. Certainly doesn't have to be. So I'm thankful that we can tag up with these folks, help them while we ground and pound the language, get proficient in that, and then we'll shove off to our city. So anyway, we'll go ahead with that, and yeah. We are the Craig family, called by God to be missionaries to the country of Italy, and more specifically, to the island of Sicily. Geographically, Sicily is located just off the toe of Italy's boot. Sicily is the largest island in the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by the Tyrrhenian Sea, the Ionian Sea, and of course the Mediterranean Sea. Over 80% of Sicily is mountains and hills, with Mount Etna being one of the crown jewels of Sicily. Mount Etna remains highly active throughout the year. Sicily is the home of over 5 million people. The capital of Sicily is Palermo. Palermo and its metropolitan area is home to approximately 1/5 of Sicily's population. Sicilian families are incredibly close-knit and very laid back. As a Sicilian, loyalty to family and friends is one of the most important qualities you can possess. Throughout the year, they celebrate many religious festivals, with each town and city honoring their patron saint. Religion remains very important in Sicily, with the exception of small communities of Muslims, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Pentecostals. The majority of Sicilians consider themselves practicing Roman Catholics. Our great God has specifically called us to take the good news that Jesus saves to the city of Mary. This city is approximately 9 miles east of the capital city of Palermo. Mary is a city of about 30,000 people, and it is surrounded by many other smaller towns that have not heard the true gospel of Jesus Christ. God used Jeremiah 50 verse 6 to confirm his will for us in establishing a Bible-believing church in this city. Jeremiah 50 verse 6 says, "My people hath been lost sheep. Their shepherds have caused them to go astray. They have turned them away on the mountains. They have gone from mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place." As I began to research this city, I found out that the name Mary means the resting place. There is currently one Bible-believing church on the whole island of Sicily. That established local church is located in the city of Palermo. While on my second survey trip to Sicily in March of 2019, I stayed with this pastor and his family for 10 days. It was on that trip that God knitted our hearts together, just as God did in the hearts of David and Jonathan. Once we have raised our full support, our first and foremost priority is to become proficient in the Italian language. This is absolutely crucial in reaching the people and establishing a Bible-believing work in Mary. So our immediate plan once arriving in Sicily is 1. To settle in the nearby city of Palermo, and 2. To attend language school at the university in Palermo. As we are learning to communicate with the Italian people, we will team up with that existing pastor, his family, and his church. We will be faithful in church attendance, tract distribution, soul winning and evangelizing efforts, encouraging the saints, and again, being available to do the work of the ministry in Palermo and assist any way we can. As mentioned before, the Sicilian people are a close-knit people, and the best way to reach them is to gain their trust and friendship. Our plans are to visit Mary on a regular basis, so that we might become familiar with that city and the culture there. We want our faces to become familiar to those in Mary, so that we will not be complete strangers when we move there. We want them to see that we genuinely love them and care for them, and that we are there for the long haul. The tradition of baptizing babies in a Roman Catholic ceremony is still crucial amongst Italian families. Godparents are customarily chosen, whose duty is to ensure that those recently baptized babies are raised properly in a religious manner. In the homes of Italians, you'd most likely find symbols of Christianity, such as idols and images of saints, the Virgin Mary, and Jesus. Crucifixes are hung on walls or displayed in small shrines in their homes or on the walls just outside their homes. Our desire for the Sicilian people is the same as the Apostle Paul's was in the city of Thessalonica, and that is to see them turn to God from idols to serve the living and true God. Tradition has put Italians into a deep spiritual darkness and a false sense of hope and security. We want to do as Jesus told Paul in Acts 26:18, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me.
Hello, friends. My name is Robert Carlson. For over 29 years now, I have been the pastor of the Golden Plains Baptist Church in Portage La Prairie, Manitoba. From the very beginnings of our church, God has given our people a great vision for missions, both home and abroad. God has called yet another of our precious families to go forth under our Lord's Great Commission. It is indeed my honor to recommend to you Rob and Cynthia Craig and their children, a family that have proven themselves faithful in our church. The Craigs are regular, they're dependable, they're soul winners Rob completed our own 4-year Bible Institute program in 2019. God has directed their hearts to the country of Italy, and specifically to its southern island of Sicily. I realize if your church is like ours, that you must receive many requests for assistance from many directions. But knowing that missions is the heartbeat of God, I'm asking that you would give prayerful thought to adding Rob and Cynthia Craig as an addition to your missionary outreach to the country of Italy. Thank you, and God bless.
Don't you hear them crying in such agony? They are searching for an answer for one they cannot see. And each day that passes by, you never see the pain that fills their empty eyes, that are blinded to the light. Oh, hear them cry, who will come to us? How shall we call, in whom we've not believed? How shall we believe in whom we have not heard? Oh, hear them cry, who will come to us? Oh, hear them cry, let us go to them. We know the man in whom they can believe. Let us go tell them Jesus' blood can save. Oh, hear them cry, and let us go to them. Let us go tell them Jesus' blood can save. Oh, hear them cry, and let us go to them.
For so hath the Lord commanded us, saying, I have set thee to be a light of the Gentiles, that thou shouldest be for salvation unto the ends of the earth. God has told each of us to go and share the gospel of Jesus Christ, which has the power to set captives free. For some of us, that means to reach the people of our own city. For others, that means to travel to other parts of the world to reach those without Christ there. Would you consider partnering with us prayerfully and financially? This would allow us to take the light of the glorious gospel to the lost people of Sicily, Italy. With your help, these precious people would have an opportunity to hear the truth of God's word and to trust Christ and only Christ as their hope of eternal salvation. Thank you for considering the Craig family as your missionaries to the people of Sicily, Italy. Well, amen. We're going, and Lord willing, it's hopefully by the end of this year. But anyway, they need the gospel, and if you were to, what you find in Amos is being honest, and he said he wasn't a prophet, nor was he a son of a prophet. He just merely was followed the flock. He gathered sycamore fruit and everything else, and that's me. I'm a nobody. I never got saved till I was 30 years old. I don't come from a Christian home. I'm not a preacher's kid or nothing like that. Again, just some low life off the street that God saw fit to save, and I thank you, he did. He had to reach way down for me, that's for sure. And my introduction to Catholicism was when I was about 6 years old. My family, they moved to Alberta, so that's 2 provinces to the west. And my mom put us in a Catholic school, and we were there for about 3 years until we moved back to Winnipeg. But my best friend, while in that school, was his family was heavy, staunch Catholics, and I mean they had the idols and everything. We had we wore these things against our skin with saints on them, again for protection or whatever. They got so many saints that do everything else, different things. But so I would go to confession on Saturdays. And then I would go to the Mass with them on Sundays, and eventually my mom had us baptized into the Catholic Church, and then we were confirmed and all that. So that's kind of the first 2 of the 7 sacraments that as Catholics they want you to keep. Keeping those 7 sacraments will basically keep you in a state of grace, is what they will call it. And if you were to die while in that state of grace, the worst that you're going to get is purgatory. Of course, that's what they teach. And you were to fall out of that state of grace, then you would go to hell. And so that's what they taught. But I mean, we never went to church after. When we moved back to Winnipeg, I never darkened the doors of a church again, other than if it was a baptism or something, maybe once, or a wedding. I mean, that was it. And so I started working when I was 13 years old. I started at a racetrack. It was right across the highway from us, and it was a horse track. And so I would do that early in the mornings, go and take care of the horses, feed, get them ready for exercise, groom, cool them down and all that stuff. Race home, have a shower, go to school, and after school, go back to the track and feed and everything else. And then if it was a race night, take care of all of that stuff. And I did that for about 10 years. I was a vet assistant at some point and heavily involved with animals. That's why it was a blessing to kind of dig back into it. But again, with that lifestyle picked up a lot of bad habits, a lot of sin. Again, it is not a very good occupation. Again, lots of drinking and drugs and bar scene, everything. I mean, and so when I was legal, I had to go to the bars. I mean, that's just what I did. We went to the bar, and I remember, during the course of that time, not all the time, but I would after a weekend of festivities and everything else, I'd feel guilty for 2 or 3 days. And I didn't understand why. I mean, I certainly wasn't saved or anything like that, but I carried guilt. But I would shrug it off and think, this is normal. I mean, this is what everybody does. And so the next weekend would roll off, and miraculously the guilt was gone, and I would continue on. And when I was 22, I moved away from home. I had bought a brand new truck, and I went to work in the oil patch, in the oil industry. And we have oil in the southwestern part of our province. And I did that for about 13 months or something like that, a little over a year. And so there probably wasn't a day that went by that we didn't consume alcohol or some other substance. Where we worked, where I lived, and then all our jobs to service all these the pump jacks and oil wells and everything else, they were half an hour to town, 45 minutes, an hour and a half. And so we knew where every vendor was on the way home, and that's what we did. Again, for not a good lifestyle for a single young man just moving away from home. And it was 1998. It was I came into town, or a city where my mom and dad were living. They're in Brandon now, which is 2 hours west of Winnipeg. It was my mom's birthday, and so came in and we were celebrating. I had a bunch of aunts and uncles that owned restaurants there, and so we were all gathered together as a family and celebrating my mom's birthday. And then the cousins, we went off to the bars and closed those things down. And when I had left, I ran into a check stop. I had to blow in the car, and of course blew over, and then they took me to the police station and waited there for hours and had to blow again and everything else. And I could still remember the shame on my mom's face. Walking through the doors to come and pick her drunk son up, and it just wasn't good. A child left to himself, bring his mom a shame. And a couple of weeks after that, I was back working, and we got done early that day. And so what else? We went to the bar, and the only thing that I remember that day was seeing the inside of an ambulance. When I had left, I didn't realize. Well, I mean, I didn't know, but I was jumped, and whoever did it used my face as a football, and I was broken and beat and lumpy and everything else. And again, I just remember seeing the inside of an ambulance, and that's all I remember. Again, knocked unconscious and everything else, and I guess a bystander called the ambulance, but went there for x-rays and everything else. And my dad came and picked me up the next day and was going to take me to their place. And I'll tell you, when he saw me, he just said, "Man, what a mess, what a mess." And you can think of what my mom thought when she saw her baby boy come through the door, and pretty beat up. And they just begged and pleaded with me, said, "Man, just quit that job and move back home, go to college, get your life back on track." And I did. It was a couple weeks later, I did quit, and I moved back home and went to college. And I moved away to this small town that hired me. for the career that I had trained for. I still didn't have my license back, so I had to bike 4 miles to work and bike, through the winter and everything else. But I did get my license back and I lost my job, and I moved back to Winnipeg and hooked up with old buddies and everything else, and you can imagine where that went. But it was 1999. It was December 99, and my dad and my sister, they drove 2 hours from Brandon to Winnipeg, and they brought me an application. And my dad said, "Here, filled this out. Moved back home." He said, "This pork processing plant is hiring for a second shift. They're paying good. Move back home and get it together." And so I filled it out, and this is where the Lord just began to orchestrate everything. And because right after I had filled that out, they had the company had called for a staff meeting, and so they were looking for volunteers. Said, "Listen, we're really slow right now. We need to start laying people off." And so I thought, well, yeah. So I volunteered, and I knew that I had that application filled out. And so I threw my mattress in the back of my truck, grabbed a couple of garbage bags of clothing, and that was it. That was all I had in my life, and moved back home. And so I started working there January of 2000. And they must have hired every immature male in that city because we were all on that shift. And, it's funny because from 11:45 till 2 o'clock, the bars are still open. Imagine that. And so that's where we'd find ourselves. Of course, being, summertime, the afternoon shift is Friday, it's payday. Who wants to work on an afternoon? And so we would go to the bar and everything else. And so that was just our life. And but there was a man there who was a member of the Bible Baptist Church. He was a lead hand, had been there since it started. And so, he wasn't stuck on the line. And so, he would hand out tracts, witness to people. I heard of him. I've seen him a few times. Again, with me being on the afternoon, I didn't see too much of it. But eventually, I did transfer to the AM shift, and so he would witness to me and give me tracts and everything else. And I mocked him, and I mocked his God. I cursed him, and I cursed his God. Anything that I could do to get a laugh out of my buddies on the line, I did it all at his expense and God's expense. I'll tell you, wicked to the core. But I'm thankful that man never gave up. But, again, through that, I was 28 years old, and God had had enough. And he threw all of my sin on my shoulders, and it got heavy quick. And I began to get depressed because I was thinking, man, why would I be feeling guilty for things that I had done 5 years, 10, 15, 20 years back? And I carried a lot of guilt, carried a lot of sorrow, didn't understand it. So that depression sank deep in. And I would go online, and I would check symptoms for depression. I could check them all off. I had it all off. I didn't want to go to the doctor's, pride. I didn't want to go on any medication or anything like that. Just thought I could shrug it off, but couldn't. Everywhere I went, there was my sin. And after that, suicidal thoughts now entered in. The thoughts of worthlessness, hopelessness, and all that. So taking my life, that began to consume my thoughts. And there was a time I was hunting on my land. I had 3 acres, and 2 of it was all bush. And I remember sitting on the pail, and I had the gun in my hand, and I never put it to my head, but I rested my head against it. And I had to fight the temptation that day to kill myself. That was the hardest that I ever had to fight, that temptation to do it. And I thank God that I never did, because right after that man, he gave me a tract from their church, and it was just, still remember, it was just a little trifold thing. And, it talked about the origins of sin and why we sin and everything else. But on the 3rd page, halfway down, it said, "Do you feel guilty, and do you feel sorrow for your sin?" And when I read that, there was just a little flicker of hope inside. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Finally, there was some hope. There was an answer. So I don't know if I read the ink off of that track or what. I don't know what happened to it, but I clung to that track. And then now I began to just get close to that man, and now I'm listening. And, in all that time, he would invite me to church and everything else, and of course I would lie and tell him, yeah, I'm coming, and I would never show up. But I did. Finally, it was my 30th birthday. It was January 17th, 2005. Walked through the church doors and sat beside him. The message was preached and the altar call was given, and I didn't go up. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there, watched other people go up, and so when I left, I closed the doors to the church, and I literally said, man, you are an idiot. Why didn't you go up? Again, I didn't have enough didn't know enough about faith and to accept Christ where you were and as you are and who you are and everything like that. So a sucker for punishment, I came back. I came back January 23rd, 2005. And this time the message was preached, the altar call was given, and I was the first one up there, front row and center. And I was on my knees, and I just confessing what I knew to confess. I just wanted the Lord. I knew that I was so far below the bottom of the barrel, you couldn't get any deeper. And but I just wanted Christ. And so he picked me up out of that day and out of that miry clay, out of that horrible pit. And he put my feet upon a rock, and he established my goings. And he put a new song in my mouth. But you know, when you're in the world that long, and you're in it that deep, you all know, I've seen the mud out here. It just doesn't fall off when you step out of it. In fact, it clings there for quite a while. And but you know what? Just through God's word and the preaching and everything else, the old life began to just fall away. And but God is good. God's been faithful, and I'm so thankful that again that He saved me that day, and because I surely deserved hell, and I still do. But by His grace, His mercy, you know, are you washed in the blood? We sang, and I sure am, and I'm thankful for it. But my call to missions came probably a few years later. Again, I don't know nothing about nothing. I'm not, say, nothing remotely Christian about us in my family, and God dealt with me. I was part of a Baptist Brider church, didn't know nothing, didn't know any better. I heard for 6 years why that church was the church, because we can trace our lineage back to John the Baptist and all that stuff, and we're part of the bride. And everybody else, like yourselves, you'll eat the crumbs off our dinner plates and everything else. And so that's what I heard for 6 years. But God had called me while I was in that church, and so I didn't know nothing about it. And we'd have missions conferences every year. And God would stir my heart, and I understand that when you're under preaching for 5 or 6 days or however long you have your conferences for, you get stirred up. And it's emotional and everything else. But, you know, the true test of that thing is you know, weeks down the road. You know, if you're back into that same old rut, or if there's still a dealing in there. And there was still a dealing. And so we were having our 25th anniversary for our church as a local church. And I had a missionary staying there. He come up from North Dakota. And so I talked about him and just, you know, how God dealt with him and everything else. And this was a man that was a genius. He worked for the military. He would design things. You know the little tabs on your cans? He designed that thing. And so this guy could have, you know, been a millionaire and everything else. And here he was, surrendered to the native reserves in North Dakota. And I'll tell you, he was a humble man. But he was staying with me, and so I asked, you know, how God dealt with him and everything else like that. And so, you know, he left. And so I talked to the pastor, and I won't get into all the gory details. But the pastor said, you can't do it. And again, I'll say it, I'm a remarried man. And what happened was I got married lost. And when I got saved, my wife got lost, if you understand what I'm saying. She was gone, wanted no part of it. And so while I was in that church, I'd stayed single. I had no intentions of ever leaving that church. And so I heard for 6 years why a remarried man couldn't be in the ministry. And so I never ever even entertained that thought. It never even crossed my mind. And I was just going to be faithful where the Lord would have me here in the local church and everything else. And again, you know, they say you're not a second or third rate citizen, but really that's how they treat you. You can't do nothing. The best that you could do was song lead, and that was it. And so when I talked to the pastor about it, because what the pastor taught was that Paul was a divorced man. And they taught that because in order to be a member of the Sanhedrin, you would have had to be married, kids, all that stuff. And so this is, I don't know how you guys teach it or whatever. I'm just saying that's what they taught. And when Paul said, you know, I've suffered the loss of all things and everything else. But anyway, so I was telling the pastor, I said, you know, I think God's dealing with me about Italy. And how it all came about was just the Lord had opened the doors and showed me, hey, I want you to go to Italy and everything else. And again, I didn't know much about it. And so I talked, and he said, no, you can't. And I said, but you're teaching that Paul was a divorced man, and he's going around starting churches and everything else. And he said, yeah, but you can't. He said, you know, unless God killed your wife or she came back to you, that's the only way that you could do it. And again, I had pages of written testimony and of everything that God had showed me and did and everything. And I just went home and I just ripped it all up. And I said, yeah, I can't do that. Again, I had no intentions of leaving that church. And but anyway, eventually I did leave the church just for various reasons and everything else, and met my new pastor. I met my wife, and when the Lord began to work again, reminding me, saying, listen, man, I've called you to do something, and you're not being obedient to it. And so when I met my pastor, I didn't know him, didn't know nothing about him, never heard of him before, and I'm in his office for 2 minutes. He said, hey, he said, are you saved? I said, yeah, January 23rd, 2005. And then he looks at me and he said, have you ever been called to preach? And my heart just sunk into my stomach. I thought, what? I didn't say it, but I said, what? I said, who asked a question like that? Because it's not a second question that I asked. And I said, you know what? You're familiar with the church that I'm from. I said, I did believe that I was. But no, and I just left it at that. So we didn't start coming right away. I got bitter against Baptist churches. I told my wife, I said, I could care less if I ever step foot in a Baptist church again. I'm done. And so we were attending. We knew we had to be in church, and we lived in the country, and so we were attending a little Mennonite church, country church and stuff, but liberal. And so just the Lord, just through the process of time, the Lord said, you know what, you need to call Rob Carlson. You need to get into that church. And so I'd phone him and said, hey, preacher, I said, we had met some time ago. I said, is it okay if my family come to church? He said, yeah, absolutely. And so we started coming, and it was our first sweetheart banquet. Never been to one before. Didn't know nothing about them. College and career, they decorated the fellowship hall, and I thought, this is going to be great. We're going to eat. We're going to fellowship, and it's going to be a great night. And so I walked into the fellowship hall with my wife, and walked in, and the theme that year was all done up in Italy. We had just started coming to this church, and my heart I said, what? And it was right after that, the man was preaching in pastor's absence. And he said this, and again, that call and everything was about 2009, so we're now into 2015. And he said, even if God's called you to do something, and it was 6 years ago, you're still required to do it. I'm thinking, 2000, I'm like, 6 years ago? Why would he pick 6 years ago? Well, that was the Lord. And again, pastor would ask me to preach, and I would say, no, I'm not doing it. Now I kind of felt bad because I was being disobedient to my pastor, but I didn't feel worthy being, again, had that remarried man can't do this. I was like, no, I'm not doing it. And so it was November 2015, and God was working me over and said, man, I've called you to do something, you're not doing it. And I was sick and tired of the battle, that constantly, hey, you're going to Italy. No, you're not doing it. And flick this one off, side with the little red one. And so I had that battle for 6 years. And so it was November, and I said, okay, Lord, I'm so sick and tired of this. I wish you'd just take this thing away, please. I don't want to cause reproach to your name or anything like that. Again, I didn't know of any remarried man in the ministry. I didn't know. In fact, when I was in that bridal, I thought it would be a sin to go online and listen to other preachers. That's how loyal we had to be to the pastor. So I didn't know nothing. I didn't know anybody other than my pastor. That was it. And I'd purposed that. 3 weeks went. I said, okay, Lord, take me to the book of the Bible. And he said, okay, you're going to go to the book of Acts. And so I went through the book of Acts. I spent 3 weeks there. I fasted and I prayed. Fasted every couple of days and just tried to get a hold of the mind of God. And so that 3 weeks ended. It was December 9th, 2015. And I thought all day, I thought, you know what? This will settle it. I'm going to talk to pastor, and he's going to tell me no, and I'll never think about it ever again. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I'll even ask him if he knows of any remarried man. And so when it was Wednesday, pastor preaches. I grabbed him. I said, can I talk to you? He said, yeah, sure. What's going on? I said, you remember when we first met? Yep. I asked if I was saved, and I said, and you asked if I was called to preach, and he said, yeah, well, what's going on? I said, well, I never finished the story. And I basically just told him everything and how God had dealt with me, showed me clearly Italy and everything, and how I just ripped everything up, and so he started smiling. And I thought, well, somebody that says no does not smile. He said, isn't that wonderful? I'm like, no. And he said, you know what? He said, don't worry about anybody else. He said, let me fight your battles. You get into Bible Institute. And he said, oh, by the way, he said, we support 59 missionaries. No, 57, I think a couple came off the field. But he said, we got 5 or 6 missionaries on that mission board that we support that are remarried. And I thought, yeah, because their spouse has died, right? And he said, no, they've been through the unfortunate circumstance of a divorce. And so, again, you get into Bible Institute. So I did. January 2000, I was in Bible Institute. Again, I was done in December 99. 2019, just had my Bible grad last year, and so we've been off to the races. So again, I always knew that it was. Nobody could ever take that. I just didn't know where until God confirmed it. But so that's my testimony. As far as people saying, well, they always ask me, well, why Italy? I said, I don't know. I never picked it. Who in their right mind would pick that? I mean, I would go to Mexico or Papua New Guinea or where everyone else is going to get churches started and everything else. But again, Italy is a tough field, and but I'm not worried about it, because the Lord gave me Acts chapter 17, and when the Apostle Paul was in Athens, he began to look around, and what did he see? He saw a city that was wholly given to idolatry, and folks, that's exactly what Italy is. If it's not the graven images and the idols and everything else that you saw, I mean, it's their fashion and their car design and all that upper north stuff. Again, they're filled with it. But when Paul was there, he got stirred in his heart, and he began to just preach Jesus Christ and the resurrection. And there were some men that grabbed him and took to another man, Areopagus, and said, thought he was a babbler. And we want to hear what you have to say, because you're bringing strange things to our ears. And the Lord reminded me, you're going to be bringing strange things to Sicily. Because even though we're washed in the blood, they drink the blood every Sunday. They believe that they crucify Christ. He's crucified every week, and that they're eating his literal flesh and drinking his blood. And so I got to tell them, no, that's not the case. And I've got to tell them that it's through Christ and his blood alone. And see, many will go to Mary. And in fact, in one of their catechisms, they have a picture of Christ crucified, and he's bleeding out of his side. And there's a priest holding a chalice there, and the blood is overflowing the chalice. But underneath that chalice is Mary, and she's got her hands out. And but the blood is not overflowing her hands; it's flowing through her hands, and she's dispensing it onto the people. And so they believe that she's the final dispenser of all grace. And I gotta say, no. It's Christ and Christ alone. He's the mediator between God and man. And so there's just a lot of strange things that I'm going to be bringing them. And when Paul, further on, he preached on Mars Hill and everything else. And when he preached that one rose from the dead, right after that, it says that some mocked and some said, yeah, we'll hear you of this again. But here's the hope that the Lord gave me in verse number 34. It said, when he was leaving, he said, some men clave unto him and believed. And so that's what the Lord has for us. He said, just be faithful. There will be some that will cleave and believe. And also in Proverbs, I think it's 27:18 or vice versa, but whoso keepeth the fig tree shall eat the fruit thereof. And if you've looked at that fig tree, it won't bear fruit for 3 to 5 years. But the point is, if you just stay with it, you will get that fruit. And so that's what the Lord just settled me on that thing. Just stay with it. There will be fruit and everything else. And so that's what we're doing. We're excited. And like I say, when I get back in July, I've already been in contact with the Italian consulate. It's in Toronto. It's about a 2-day drive. Right now, there's a minimum of a 60-day time. You can get an appointment. It's a minimum of 60 days to even get an appointment to see them. And I've already contacted them to see what we need, how to get our ducks in a row and everything else. So what I'm thinking is God just might use that time back in Canada for me to do all that running around. If I've got to go to Toronto and everything else, maybe to tidy up all that stuff. So I'm doing what I can to get support. I've been to contact with a bunch of churches in Canada. We're under different rules than down here. Still a lot of churches are under lockdown, are still having maybe just parking lot services, some not even having services at all. But I got a hold of the ones that I knew of that I had meetings with already last year. And I said, hey, can I just send you my DVD presentation? And it's just absolutely. He said, one pastor said this. He said, you know what? I don't want the devil to think that he's got an upper hand on me. And he said, so just to kick him in the teeth, I had missionaries send me their DVD, and I've already taken them on. I've already taken 4 missionaries on. And he said, we're taking you on no matter what, because we know your lineage. And he said, well, if it's okay, we're going to vote in May and anything like that. So you know what? I know churches, missionary, we're trying to do what we can do to get where we need to get and to get the gospel out. And again, I like his mentality, his attitude. I don't want the devil to think that he's got an upper hand. And so, like I say, I'll do whatever I need to do. And but like I say, it's all up to the Lord. But I believe that time is short, and so I'm just doing what I can. And like I say, I'm giving him 6 months down here. I said, listen, Lord, I'm willing to give you this time. I know I'm away from family and everything else, but you need to make it fruitful. You need to make it profitable and everything else. And God's already used your pastor to help me to get a meeting tonight. And it was the same thing a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Just other pastors, hey, you need to get a hold of this. Hey, you need to have this guy in, and all stuff like that. So March is full. I've got every available spot full except for one is the Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening. So that's full. June, April, and well, not much in July because I'll be heading home. But May, June, and April, there's still room. But again, I think it's just how it's going to be. But again, anyway, the Lord's been good to me. I just wanted to do great things for God. You know, William Carey, when I came down here last year, I just finished teaching our Sunday school class. And he said this, a message that he preached in the 1700s. He said, expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. And that's all I wanted to do for the Lord because I'm obligated to him. I owe him from what he saved me from. And he saved my life. Not only did he save my soul, but he saved my life. And so that's what I want to do. And I came down here with Psalm 118, 23. And it says, this is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. And so what the Lord has done in my life, and to get me to where I am a little slower than probably he wanted, granted, but again, it's his timing, and yeah, so I'm so thankful. Again, what the Lord has done. I don't think that I've had any cancellations on my deputation trail due to COVID. We've had some rescheduling, but I don't think that I've lost anything. I just heard of a missionary last year. He lost 54 meetings due to cancellations, and I don't know that he even got those back. So really, again, God's been good to me. But for my plan of attack is to stick with Bible-believing churches, because I know they're going to ride this thing out. I know that they're going to want their church doors open, because there's many churches out there, folks, that have Baptists on their name, but their church doors aren't open. Too many churches I've heard now of the doors permanently closed because the flock dispersed because of fear. And didn't come back. And of course, you can't pay the bills if God's people aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so I would encourage you to just keep going. I would encourage you to re-grip that plow that we're supposed to have our hands onto. Don't look back and just keep going, because Christ said, when I return, will I find faith? And unfortunately, we're living in a day and age that some people, some, not all, are using this coronavirus, and it is everywhere in my country and in this country, have used this virus as an excuse to no longer come back to church. They were fringers, and this was all it took to say, we're not coming back, and they've moved on with their lives. And folks, I want to look at the Lord. I know I'll be looking down when I see him, but I want to have my head held up high. I want to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And when I meet him, I want as many crowns as I possibly can to be able to cast at his feet. So I'd sure hate to go with nothing and have to look at him and, sorry, Lord, sorry. So, but anyway, God's been good to me. I don't deserve his mercy, his grace, of course, but I'm grateful to be here. Thank you. I don't know if anybody's got any questions. I know it usually just takes one brave soul to ask one, and then that kind of primes the engine here. Yes, sir.
Are you, when you do go over there, you're going to sell everything in Canada and find a home?
That was, yeah, that was good. That was our original game plan, was I was just going to price everything in my home, open up the doors and say, it's all for sale. Just advertise it, come in the house, or just make me an offer. I don't know what we're doing yet. We've got a son that's 16, will be 17. He's staying. And so we might just hold on to the house for his sake, help him, to get a lift up in life and stuff like that. So we don't know what we're doing with that. If he wants to stay and help with the rent and rent it off us and all that stuff, then we'll most likely just keep it. And like I say, just be a help to him, especially in this day and age with everything else. And so, yeah, again, that was the original game plan, just sell it all, except what we can get in suitcases and my books, obviously. But, yeah, that's up in the air right now. I don't know. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we